How's it going? Welcome back, my wonderful wise ones, to a special video today, as today I'm going to be showcasing Dark Souls 2 Remastered. And this is a project I've been working on for a long time, I've got to be honest. So I'm just going to be playing the game today and showcase to you what has changed about the game, and also give you an updated Dark Souls 2 2025 review, and discuss why I believe this is still one of the best Souls games, and especially now that you can remaster it if you follow my kind of guide, I guess you could say, then I think this just is the best and ultimate Dark Souls experience. Now, if you know anything about me, then you'll know I absolutely am a die-hard, passionate fan about Dark Souls, okay? Not so much Elden Ring and Bloodborne or anything else, but just Dark Souls, the universe, the history, the lore, the philosophy behind it all, you know, the battle against nihilism, existentialism, finding meaning as a finite being in an infinite universe, okay? That's basically what Dark Souls is all about.
Ah, your face. You're practically hollow. But who knows? Going hollow could solve quite a bit.
Let me just praise the sun for a moment and tell you how this game looks this gorgeous in 2025. Now, if you want to, use this setup, you will need a PC. Of course, you cannot do this on console, but I'm using two mods, okay? And I've heavily tweaked the mods to give me the ultimate experience. So first of all, let's just discuss the big changes. So as you can see, I will try and do some comparisons here and there, but I think most people won't remember just how bad this game looked on release. In 2015, it did get an upgrade with the Scholar of the First Sin edition, but this is completely next level. So I've completely overhauled all of the textures. As you can see, the draw distance is completely, blown out now. You can see all of the distance objects, all that kind of stuff. But the big mod I'm using is basically lighting overhaul for Dark Souls 2. And basically this adds volumetric lighting, almost ray tracing in effect, to Dark Souls 2. It also adds extra foliage, like the grass you can see here. And I'm going to showcase it off because this doesn't really do it justice here. But you can see like how much detail there is with the pebbles around the bonfire, and just how everything pops a lot more. Okay, so as you can see here, I'm just dragging this over here so you can see it better. This is the drop-down menu for the Dark Souls 2 lighting mod overhaul, and this is some crazy stuff. So it literally adds, custom settings, and I've gone through exactly customizing it. I might show that off at the end, but that's very technical. It's giving me the option to use DLAA, which of course Dark Souls didn't have on release. Toggle different settings on and off, add custom settings and textures and stuff like that, and then add, even the lighting style for your character. You can go Dark Souls Original or Demon Souls, lots of different options. I've actually completely erased it. It's just like a little example. So if you don't know, with Dark Souls, your character always usually emits some kind of light, but because I'm playing with basically, in effect, ray tracing with Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls 2 was always built around a lighting system, I've basically disabled that completely, so the only light source that I can actually see are actual light sources in the game. And that might not sound cool, but in Dark Souls 2, it's peak. I have to stress it's peak, because this game initially was all built around a light management system, and this just makes it like truly what Dark Souls 2 should have been, and in my opinion, the best Dark Souls game ever made. So right now, this is what it looks like without the lighting in effect, but with my textures and everything, so a little bit weird. And then this is without any of the map edits. So it will change the LOD in the distance, the grass, all that kind of stuff, but that always messes up my game, so I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to load the standard lighting overhaul preset. And there you go, now we're in. As you can see, everything's loaded in nicely, and the grass and everything that's been added. But you can go a lot deeper, and that's how I've customized it to look exactly how I want to, because it does change some of the original art design in Dark Souls 2. For example, Medulla, it didn't look like this originally when I booted up this mod. It took away some of the color, the original color palette and stuff like that. But you can go in on the lighting preset and you can literally customize absolutely everything if you're a sad man like myself. So you can actually disable the lighting overhaul. So this is what it originally looked like, the mod. And to me, it kind of takes away some of the essence of Medulla. And Medulla is my favorite hub in all of the Dark Souls games. So I just disabled it for this area in particular. And you can customize the, sun color, how much light it gives off, all that kind of stuff. And it goes a lot deeper with reflections and post-processing and all that kind of stuff. But I've already customized each map, each zone, to my preference as to how I want it. So it captures the perfect art style of Dark Souls 2, remastered, in my opinion, and still staying true to the original, which I think is very important.
You think you're different? That you can handle it? Yes, I remember that feeling, for I was the same. So, let me help you out with your soul searching.
So I do hope you enjoy this Dark Souls 2 remastered review, because I do honestly think this is still the best Dark Souls game in 2025. And if you're like me and you're not happy with Night Ring and where the direction is going, then I highly recommend that if you never played Dark Souls 2, to go back, try out this mod list that I'm giving you here. And basically, it's the overhaul texture pack that I'm using, and I'll put it down in the pinned comment, but this is the highest one. I'm using 2K textures on everything, but as you can see, it just makes everything pop a lot more. But if you're like me and you're not happy with the direction of, where Souls is going and From Software, and you want to go back into, what made them great to begin with, which is, the art style, the slow nature of the combat, the deep, methodical, timing of everything, bosses actually mattering, not them just being regurgitated and reused over and over again. I could go on and on, but I'm not a big fan of what's happened. I much prefer the earlier Dark Souls games, what they stood for, how they tie their themes, thematically, in with the gameplay, and then ties that into the whole, philosophy and meaning behind Dark Souls and why gamers play it and why, it means something to everyone, all that kind of stuff. That's why I love it. So, I honestly just think this is the pinnacle way to play Dark Souls 2 in 2025. So, here's a great showcase of how it looks completely different now, thanks to the lighting overhaul. So basically each light source, as you can see, actually, casts real light. So basically ray tracing, in other words. And you can see that on my armor and all that kind of stuff. And in the distance over here, you can see that it's kind of shining through some volumetric fog. And that's because the lighting overhaul also adds, volumetric fog and all that kind of stuff, which is really nice. So I'll just go in here, clear this area. 1 second. Okay, so here's a good example of just exactly what the mod does. You can see that actually the light is spilling through the floorboards at the top. So you get full volumetric lighting in Dark Souls 2, a game that came out in 2015, which I just think looks absolutely incredible. Even Dark Souls 3 or, Elden Ring doesn't look this good, if I'm honest. This looks much better, in my opinion. Like I said, all the textures are just super high resolution and much more detailed. It's hard to showcase while also playing Dark Souls. This could be a new challenge, I guess. So even the water casts reflections now, which is pretty crazy. And you can adjust, you know, how much bloom you want when it hits certain metals and stuff like that. So because I don't have any, you know, light under my character like you would normally in other Dark Souls games, you know, even things like drinking the Estus flask that actually emits light, which is pretty cool. And actual dark areas are super dark, like super dark. And you can see like just how the light spills onto the floor. Just looks absolutely incredible. You know, basically doing what ray tracing does, but in a game from 2015. I might just summon this person actually, because then I can focus more on showcasing the graphics and stuff. Oh, hello there, good sir, noble knight. So as you can see, like the blue light from the ship is actually casting light onto the water. And maybe a lot of people don't care about this kind of stuff. They think, oh, you know, if the game works and it looks good, that's fine. I'm not a graphical snob. You know, I think games have gone too far with trying to push graphics. But when it elevates the experience and makes it even more like aesthetically pleasing to the actual art style itself, that's when it really matters to me. And that's what I love about this mod so much is the textures, yeah, you can take them or leave them, but honestly it looks so much better with higher textures. But the lighting overhaul for Dark Souls 2, that's why I say this is Dark Souls 2 remastered. I've literally remastered Dark Souls 2, I think better than anyone else on the planet maybe, which is a statement, or a very sad statement, I don't know which. But honestly, it just, you know, it elevates what Dark Souls 2 was trying to be, and as someone who thinks Dark Souls 2 is the best Dark Souls game, it's very misunderstood, but honestly it has the best DLC content, it has the most game, it stays the, you know, truest to the original Souls, Dark Souls 1, and even, you know, kind of capturing the feeling of old From Software with Demon Souls and Kingsfield, that slow nature, and it still, you know, ties all of its, you know, gameplay thematically in with the lore and the universe, and goes deep into the, you know, Dark Souls philosophy, which is a video I'm working on, because I've always wanted to talk about that, because that's what, you know, that's why it means so much to me. It just elevates what Dark Souls 2 was trying to be, the art style, and the lighting system that they were trying to go for, because the lighting in Dark Souls 2 wasn't just, you know, an aesthetic, it was actual a gameplay change, because they wanted to make you feel even more oppressed, and actually a lot of different enemies react to light sources in Dark Souls 2 originally, but it never felt like that because things weren't actually dark, and light sources didn't actually emit, you know, proper volumetric, almost ray tracing lighting, which now it does thanks to this mod. Like the spiders, they are, you know, afraid of light, a lot of, you know, enemies that kind of lurk in the dark, and you go to a lot of dark areas in which you can't literally see without carrying a torch, so it's very important to carry a torch with you, but obviously, you know, that makes things a little bit more risky. So yeah. Okay, so here's, you know, a pretty crazy example, but as you can see, like, everything, like I said, now casts shadows, even, you know, water reflections. You can see, like, the volumetric lighting in full effect here, which looks absolutely crazy for a game that came out in 2015.
After the advent of fire, the ancient lords found the three souls, but your progenitor found a fourth, unique soul, the Dark Soul. Your ancestor claimed the Dark Souls and waited for fire to subside, and soon the flames did fade, and only dark remained.
So as you can see now, I'm in the undead purgatory, and the lighting overhaul didn't just add, you know, lighting changes to make everything feel much more immersive, but it also added, you know, items and just more detail into the world of Dark Souls 2. So particle effects, you can see it looks so much better and much more dense, and the dark is now completely dark, so if you don't have a light source, you know, you will notice that. So it is important to carry a light source with you wherever you go. Like over there is completely pitch black, so you do actually have to make use of the torch mechanic, which is what makes Dark Souls 2, you know, very special, because that's the whole point of the game. But here's a good showcase. Like, everything casts shadows now when you have light source next to it. Every object in the game, so it just makes everything feel much more realistic, which I really like. Alright, so as I run to a location to show you more of its beauty, let me quickly give you a Dark Souls 2 2025 review and discuss why Dark Souls 2 Remastered is honestly still the best Dark Souls game you can experience. So I absolutely love the first game. It's magic for a reason. People love it. Like I said, it taps deep into what it means to be human, and it plays with many different like philosophies and stuff like that I think is really important in gaming. It's not many games can actually pull that off. What it means to slowly lose yourself until you just kind of lose your identity and become what society and the identity society has given you, like a merchant, a warrior, stuff like that. When you lose all, self-actualization in the world around you, you become hollow. And it's the same for people, who deal with, a kind of a nihilistic outlook on life. And it just has so many themes tied into it, like the meaning of the universe. Like, everything is physical in Dark Souls, which is so fascinating, where most fantasy games play with the metaphysical and the immaterial, like ghosts and stuff like that. Everything has real essence in Dark Souls. Souls actually manifest. They're not just a currency in the gameplay mechanic, but also how everything draws power, how everything in this universe has energy. That's why the universe in Dark Souls is decaying and just going dark, because we're running out of that finite resource, and everything feeds off that. How the demonic forms aren't coming from a different dimension, they're made by like gods and higher beings with higher souls. It just has so much complex meaning in Dark Souls, and I just love it because everything feels grounded and well thought out to a point where it's just crazy to me. Like the universe being stale and stagnant at the beginning, just like our universe, and then like these kind of everlasting dragons breathing life into this infinite universe, these everlasting dragons existing throughout time and space. It just has so many cool concepts. The idea of humanity not being something that innately everyone has, but something that is kind of taken. It just has so many interesting themes, which I love. But anyway, here's another beautiful location of Dark Souls 2. And it doesn't showcase it as much, but you can see that the sun is giving off, the volumetric lighting. It is coming through the ropes and stuff like that, which looks absolutely beautiful. And like even the castle itself now has so much more detail to it. Like, as we approach, we can see that the sun is highlighting this pillar on the left, and because of the enhanced textures, like, it just pops. It looks so metallic, and I don't know, I love it. It looks so good. Oh shit, what are you doing here? You wanna find me 1v1? Just my fists? Holy shit. That didn't happen. So I do hope you enjoy this Dark Souls 2 Remastered video and this Dark Souls 2 2025 review. It really does mean a lot to me, just covering games that I'm super passionate about, themes that I'm super passionate about, and do look forward to my philosophy breakdown on Dark Souls. But let's just show off some more locations and discuss the game a little bit in the current year. And if you are enjoying the video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to become a wise one today if you love this kind of deep gaming analytical content, reviews, and philosophical content that I try and cover on my channel, all of these things combined. Subscribe, become a wise one, and think for yourself. And that's what this channel is all about, and I do appreciate it if you do actually subscribe and you're new here. And for returning wise ones, just thanks for watching again. But here's another great showcase. The textures of the the floor. I'm a very special individual that this just makes me excited seeing this, this little hut, but with such detail and like this fog and atmosphere that the light produces from the bonfire. Some might say I'm a very sad person, but it just looks amazing. Also, another thing that the lighting mod does is it adds tessellation, which is basically a technique that makes textures pop and feel much more 3D. So it doesn't just add, you know, like extra grass that has physics, which is pretty cool, but also to the trees and everything around us. It just makes it pop a lot more and makes it look more 3D. So a good example is this like falling down log here. Like as I walk across it, you can see like all the splintered bark and stuff like that. Honestly, it looks better than most modern day games, but it actually runs well because, you know, it's actually optimized. But yeah, you know, that's a big difference to me, and it does look absolutely awesome. Right, but you really do actually have to use the light mechanic now. So for example, I'm just going to go into this little building over here, and if I didn't bring a light source with me, then it would be quite a difficult time to see anything actually. So, you know, it really does actually make use of the lighting mechanic, and if I don't have a light source, it is completely pitch black, especially without my character lighting. So it just makes it all actually come alive, and, you know, only real light sources from the actual environment, like outdoors and stuff like that, where they placed the light sources originally, actually emit light. You know, everything has an actual light source. Alrighty, so here will be the last location where I just gush about the graphics non-stop and actually talk about the game, Dark Souls 2 in 2025, and why you should play it. But honestly, you know, I do think I have created something quite special here. That's why I wanted to showcase it. Of course, other people have made videos about the lighting mod. It is popular for a reason, because it's quite crazy that a modder has basically managed to introduce modern day features like DLAA, you know, and full-on ray tracing in effect, volumetric lighting, and actual map edits into an old game like this. You know, it's not something that we've seen, and if they do this with Dark Souls 1 as well, then I think a lot more people will be interested. But I'm happy it happened with Dark Souls 2, because I want more people to get involved in Dark Souls 2, because it is a special game, which is what I just want to discuss now. But let's finally just round off the graphics. So, you know, using this texture pack, like I said, even just using the base lighting mod overhaul, it does add tessellation and some better, you know, like textures for some areas. But using a texture pack with it, like the one I recommend, which overhauls everything in the game, it just looks absolutely incredible. Like everything just comes alive. And again, I've heavily tweaked this, so don't expect it to look exactly like this when you download it. Because, for example, you know, this isn't what it looks like when the mod first, you know, is installed. I've literally tweaked every area to capture the essence of Dark Souls 2 and keep the art style intact while having all of the visual upgrades, because I wanted to do it justice and keep the art style alive. But, you know, like everything in the water now has like detailed reflections. You can see all the way off in the distance, and it just looks absolutely breathtaking, if you ask me. Yeah. So for example, for many of the areas like I showed in Majula, I have disabled the original effects, and this isn't how it looks like with the original mod, because I've changed like the sky settings, you know, how everything gets reflected, where the light actually bounces and stuff like that. But honestly, you know, tweaking it to how you want to keep the original aesthetic intact while keeping all of these upgrades, you know, you can change a lot. You can even add filters and stuff over it. So there's a lot to play around with, which is why this mod is not just good for, you know, people who want to experience the game, but for people who want to add content as well. But I honestly do think I've done the best job of creating a Dark Souls 2 remastered, full remake, almost to a point. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that section of the video, and let's get on to the review and yeah, just round off my thoughts. I mean, look at that. Look at that. Everything just comes so alive with these two mods that I'm using. So I highly recommend that you give it a chance and check out those mods.
This is no laughing matter, I tell you.
Another really nice detail, like, is just in the environment. You know, like everything casts shadows now, so even the trees and stuff, you will see all of the shadows, which looks super cool. But anyway, now let's discuss Dark Souls 2 in 2025. Why you should play Dark Souls 2 in 2025, and let's dive into this Dark Souls 2 2025 review, as this is now the peak of Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 Remastered, if you just use those two simple mods, and actually, luckily, they're not too difficult to install, surprisingly. Not like Bethesda games. You just have to, basically just drop it in your game file in the right place, and yeah, it's free to download. It doesn't take up too much space, and you can get a completely visual overhaul of this beautiful game. And it, it's not too taxing. I'm, on a 4070 with an i9, so pretty good rig, but not like, crazy like high YouTuber levels of that swag money to afford a crazy system. And it runs, at 60 FPS because that's, it's capped. But it is a 20-15-year-old game. I wouldn't recommend getting the 4K textures because that's overkill. But yeah, if you have a 4K monitor, you could. But yeah, I highly recommend it. So, Dark Souls 2, what I love about this game and why it still holds up in 2025, in my opinion, especially if you're playing Dark Souls 2 Remastered, as I like to call this setup. Sorry if I am rambling a little bit, but it is quite hard to, do a Let's Play and a review at the same time. What the hell happened there? Anyway, as I was saying, yeah, so Dark Souls 2, the reason why I love this game so much is, it's not as interconnected as the first Dark Souls game, and the level design in that game is absolutely peak. It's, just incredible what they did with it. I love how all of the bosses are memorable, and they just like loop around on each other with the level design. And there's basically, like two ways to play the game. Like a secret kind of storyline that a lot of players miss. But honestly, Dark Souls 2 does many of the same, thematic stuff that I love about in Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 2, in fact, goes a lot deeper, I would say, than even Dark Souls 1 in many areas. The combat, I understand why some people weren't that happy with the changes in Dark Souls 2. But honestly, if you just level up Adaption a little bit, to like 15 or something, you can't really notice a difference between this and Dark Souls 1 when it comes to, like iframes, all that kind of stuff. Also, there's a lot more build, like variation in Dark Souls 2. You can actually dual wield your weapons. So, for example, if I get out my maces that I sometimes like to dual wield, instead of just going, like one-handed, and then, using it as a double weapon, instead of just making it a two-handed weapon, which you normally do in Dark Souls, you go into this dual-wielding stance, which looks super awesome. And it basically means you can play, dual-wield, which adds extra damage. For example, you can just do like one hit, but use both weapons at the same time, which I think is pretty cool. Narratively, I also love the idea of, the dark side and trying to break the curse. The DLCs are some of the best in all of Dark Souls, as I have mentioned already, and a lot of people do agree with that, even if they aren't huge Dark Souls 2 fans. And I also just love the light mechanic, and I am biased because playing it in this setup, I did play it originally before, but I never played all the DLCs, but playing it with, as a remastered experience with the lighting overhaul, it honestly makes it the best Dark Souls game, because now the added light mechanic that they kind of showed off when it first came out, advertised at E3 or whatever it was, that was going to be a big feature, but they kind of stripped that back. But now you can basically add it back in so it actually matters, and there are still a lot of leftover mechanics that utilize the lighting system, like I said, with the enemies and locations, all that kind of stuff. I do think that the bosses at times are a little bit frustrating because they aren't as memorable as distinct monsters. You still get them, but there are a lot more just kind of generic bosses. But there's also some crazy bosses in Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls 3 and beyond that point, it always felt too frantic and spammy to me. I like the more kind of chess style of kind of figuring out the attack patterns, slowly figuring out how to beat a boss. And also they do have some gimmick fights, which I'm actually kind of a fan of. So there's a lot in Dark Souls 2 that I love. Thematically, story-wise, location-wise, You know, level design wise, it's still really great, even if it isn't as strongly connected as the first game. It's still, you know, a great experience if you ask me. And honestly, it just kind of got hated on for no reason, just simply because that was a popular thing to do back then. But I think as time has gone on, people have realized, you know, it was a great game. Just because it wasn't made, you know, by Miyazaki completely doesn't mean it was a bad game whatsoever. In fact, I still rate this as the best Dark Souls game, you know, next to 1 anyway. And certainly better than Elden Ring and anything that came after Dark Souls 3, where I feel like the series changed a lot. But honestly, it's just a great, you know, game to play if you like that slower nature of Dark Souls 1, the more heavy focus on exploration, going, you know, wherever you want, you know, almost having an open world without it actually being a bloated open world like Elden Ring, which I really like. And like I said, you know, lots of different play styles with Dark Souls 2. Another small complaint that people had for Dark Souls 2 when it came out is, you know, there's too many enemies, especially in Scholar of the First Sin Edition, which is what this is. You know, they added too many enemies. By the way, the grass looks incredible, doesn't it here? Like, this doesn't exist in the original game, just so you know. I will try and do some comparisons, but just go and watch some, you know, 2015 release videos of the game. And obviously it hasn't changed from that point to now, but now it has, thanks to my remaster, or thanks, I should say, to the mod, and just what I've done with it to utilize it. But yeah, a lot of people were just like saying that there were too many enemies and stuff like that. But honestly, they were playing it still like Dark Souls 1. You know, this is trying to be different compared to Dark Souls 1. You know, innovate on the formula. So you don't actually have to lock on to all of the enemies. In fact, it encourages you to be more kind of free-flowing with the combat when there are lots of enemies, and not use the lock-on feature actually. That's why a lot of the bosses have multiple enemies and, you know, kind of extra enemies with them. And I don't think it was like a cheap cop-out. I think that's just how the game was designed. Some people obviously don't like that, but I honestly think, you know, it just makes it even more engaging, honestly, compared to the first one, where if you go back and play that, it is actually quite simple if you've mastered it, to a point where Dark Souls 2 feels very, you know, refreshing, but still the same DNA exactly as Dark Souls 1, which is what I really like. So that is my Dark Souls 2 2025 review. I do still highly recommend it. I do think it is the best Dark Souls game. Like I said, just ignore him. But thank you so much for watching, my wonderful wise ones. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you want to, you know, me to cover this game more in detail or anything else. But I will be making more Dark Souls videos, of course, as there's tons on my channel. But thank you so much for watching. I'll be seeing you in the next one. Have a great day, and yeah, peace out. Bye bye. Asshole. Not you, the archer.